Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Erasmus Expeditions. We are here with episode 32 of the Help Action series here on the channel. This is a series that I do where I bring on a guest and we discuss a certain topic, and we do a little bit of interview, a little bit of Q&A, get to know the person a bit better. And I'm super excited tonight to be discussing starting a campaign with your RPGs and your favorite systems, things of that nature. And I'm very excited to welcome my guest this evening, Dave. How are you son of a bitch?
Good. How are you doing, Jeremy?
I'm doing good, man. We've got power back on. We have heat. We have internet, which is fantastic. It was not the case
I know.
earlier this week.
Are you
It
in
was rough.
Texas?
I am. Yeah. I'm in Southeast Texas,
Oh,
around
I'm so
the
sorry
greater Houston
right
area.
now.
It's okay. Luckily, we've been making a lot of renovations
Yeah.
in our house because of Hurricane Harvey that hit several years ago. And one of the changes that we made was installing PEX pipe throughout our house and ripping out all the galvanized pipes. And it was the smartest thing that we ever did. But not everybody in the area was quite as lucky, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. Only the fit survive in Texas is my understanding.
Oh my, that guy.
I will say no more.
Between him and Ted Cruz, it's like, really? This is the best we can do? This is what elevated people in the state look like? Yeah.
Well, what are you going to do? And D&D.
And D&D, exactly. That's the best we can do. Yeah, man, I'm excited to have you on. Why don't you tell people where they can find you if they don't know, and kind of what you're up to?
Sure. So we run a couple of YouTube channels, Nerdarchy and Nerdarchy Live. The Nerdarchy YouTube channels where we talk about RPGs. I mean, mostly it's 5e content, but occasionally we do venture into other territories to talk about stuff. And then the Nerdarchy Live channel is we have guests come on and like yourself and basically do this, talk for an hour and just talk about gaming and whatever. And on those, we cast a much broader net. So it might be other YouTubers or industry people that do something that's not D&D, or it might be D&D. And then we also have a website where we put out several articles a day about D&D and other RPGs.
Yeah, you guys have been in business for a long time. God, I would say you'd have to be approaching 8 years or so at least.
That's not a bad guess. So we were in year 7. I think we just hit year 7.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, we started in 2014. And so like we had the fortunate luck of starting right before 5e dropped. So that really like helped and heralded our channel a lot.
Yeah, it would have given you a ton of content to discuss and talk about, and stuff that was very hot button in the community at that point as well.
Yeah.
I remember when D&D Next was playtesting. I mean, even that was kind of even before the internet was really strong. The hobby, at least, was not super strong on social media at that point. But I remember there being quite a bit of buzz around D&D Next and what was happening with it and what it was going to mean for the future of the game and all this kind of stuff. So that's a really good time to strike.
We didn't know there was a D&D Next, to be honest with you. Like, we weren't really big on the online scene. We were just like doing our thing, playing our games in the basement. Eventually we made it out of our parents' basement into our own basements. And we decided to start doing this thing and started poking around. And like, we weren't even sure anyone would care, right? About a couple of old dudes talking about D&D on the internet. And then we found, Dawnforge Cast like had a decent following, and then we found Noah Atweiler, Countermonkey Spoonie had like 30,000 subscribers, and I was like, oh my god, that's crazy! That many people, are watching people play, or talk about D&D. And then like soon after that, we found It Me JP, which was actually I think he was the first one to stream like live play games, on the internet. I don't think anyone was doing it before then. So yeah, there wasn't much. There was like a small community of YouTubers that didn't YouTube for the reason that most of us do it, where like we're talking to an audience. They did it to talk to each other. They just used the platform to basically do nothing but video responses, and it was called the the RPG brigade. It used to be the YouTube RPG brigade, right? And it was like a close knit community. It was cool, but like they also had some very different views than we did when we started doing this, because we're like, we like doing this thing. It's fun. It's cool. Wouldn't it be even cooler if it was like our job? And we always approached it as building a business about something we really love. And that community really hated that concept. So we kind of like watched them from afar. But it was kind of fascinating to see. So I feel like we were like maybe the second wave of D&D YouTubers.
That's impressive. Yeah, I started my channel 5 years ago in November with I just dropped the name of it, Brigade Con 2015, I think. So yeah, I ran my very first online game for that convention and played in my very first online game during that convention, and the hook set deep. And I love running actual play games on the internet. It's fantastic. Like we were talking about before we went live, like I'm without a doubt certain that it saved my sanity this past year.
Yeah. I like a combination of both. I like being able to play some stream games, but I also like and enjoy having those games that are kind of private. It's just like you and your friends.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm lucky enough that I've played with a home group for a long time now on a weekly basis. Probably, God, it's been about 21 years since we started playing. And up until the pandemic hit, we have been playing in person every week. And that's been a hard adjustment because my wife and I have been tuning in virtually to the gathering because we're trying to social distance and all that kind of stuff. And it's been rough not getting to hug our friends and be at the table with people. And there's a level of like visceral interaction whenever you're actually sitting within arm's reach of each other and being able to like roll dice and share snacks and, chit chat about what's gone on during the day and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I miss it a lot.
It changes the nature of the experience when you go from in person to online. For the in-person games to me are more about socializing and just social interaction with your friends, and D&D so happens to be the game that we play while we do that, right? You could change that out with watching football or hanging out at the bar or playing cards or whatever people do. For us, it was just D&D, and in different points of my life, the amount the game actually mattered varied, right? There was definitely a long period where it was more about just like, oh, this is a good excuse to hang out with my buddies and do something together. And slightly less about the gaming experience. When I play online, it generally is just about like the gaming experience. So it disconnects a lot of the social aspects of the game, I feel like.
For sure. Yeah. My home group, we play with miniatures and terrain, and there's definitely people getting up and down from the table constantly. We've all got kids that we're trying to keep up with, and it's a lot more casual. There's not a lot of heavy role playing, so it's a lot more bent on the side of mechanics and lengthy combats and dungeon crawls, things like that, which I love. I love that kind of style of play in addition. But most of the online play definitely gravitates more towards the strong role play, and the theater background that I have really helps it helps scratch that itch, because I don't get to do theater anymore. I don't get to act on a stage anymore. So it's kind of taken the place of that for me. So it's nice to be able to experience a healthy dose of both of those styles at the same time.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's one of the great things about us doing Nerdarchy is it did introduce us to gaming online. I don't know if you remember the One Shot group on Facebook where people would throw up games all the time. You could just jump into a game. And like we were using Google Hangouts in the very beginning, if anybody remembers that, and just streaming it raw to a channel. There was no VTTs. Everything was theater of the mind. We took part in a lot of those games, and the great aspect of that was like being able to game with people that were, in a different state, in a different country, on a different continent, like, which you just can't experience at your home group. So, so that added a new element for us that we really enjoy to the hobby. Also, like, the weird thing too is, like, I feel like one of the things that makes online play kind of lend itself to RPing a little bit is the turn nature of the software we use, right? So, and it also detracts from the social aspects of the game. Like, you're sitting at a table with your buddies, you're like yelling and screaming over each other, and there's a conversation going off on the side. You just can't do that on a Zoom call or any of the software.
That's what the side chat is for. And I
Yeah.
am notoriously ill-mannered in the side chat of any game that I'm in. I'm constantly trying to bust people's chops and break people, making all kinds of very inappropriate humor, jokes and things like that. That's just how I get out steam when I play. The role play can be super dark and intense and in the moment, and I'm all for it. But the side chat, you can forget it. I'm going to be doing everything I can to make people laugh. Um,
I'm
but
not so
yeah,
much into the side chat, but that's only
yeah.
because you haven't seen me type before. So
That's fair. That's very fair. Yeah, I have big fat fingers and I have to type and retype, and yeah,
yeah.
it's a nightmare sometimes. But um, well, one of the things that I like to ask kind of upfront, and part of getting to know you a little bit better, and we've already talked a little bit about past gaming experiences and things, but what I want to ask about is when and how did you find gaming? How did you get into this hobby of ours?
So, for me, and like for my generation, it was like you knew somebody that gamed, and it was like usually like one of your friends' older siblings, right? Because like there wasn't really gaming stores. I think, like, our town had a comic book store that had like one rack dedicated to gaming stuff, and like, I used to get all of my gaming stuff mostly from Walden Books and B. Dalton, things that people probably don't even know what I'm talking about. So, you know, and you'd go to the mall, right? And that's where they were there. But when I think, like, when I was like really young, like 5 or 6, I had like an older neighbor that would come and hang out. I might even been a little bit older than that. I was probably a little bit older than that, but he would hang out with me, and he brought the red box over. And then he brought me over to his friends, and we like made Gamma World characters and played a session of Gamma World or two, and then I wouldn't touch gaming for a few more years. Uh,
I've
when
heard Gamma World can have that effect on people.
Yeah, it was all the Gamma World. Like that neighbor moved away, and I wasn't connected with that friend group per se. So, and I was also much younger than them as well. So, when I hit my like early teens, late tweens, one of the older kids in the neighborhood would play backyard sports with us, and it was I remember being during the summertime, and it was like after a wiffle ball or run the bases or something, and he's like, "Hey, do you guys want to play D&D?" And we're like, "What's?" And I vaguely knew it was because I'd seen it a few years ago. Um, and then, like, he started running a regular game for us, and then from there it was like, for the next couple summers we would just play, like, all kinds of different RPGs. Everyone would show up at a different game, like every week, it seemed like, where we'd make a character and play a session maybe. And and that's where it kind of started. And I would do that into my teens, and then I would stop, and then in my early 20s, um like, I needed something to do with my time. I kind of hit like a rough patch, and like it was in a transitional phase of my life. So I decided to start a D&D group with one of the guys I grew up with, and I was dating Ted's sister at the time. So I started, I got Ted, and then my youngest brother, and then Nate, which was around in the early days of, it was in Nerdarchy for a while, and he grew up with Ted. So like that was like the core group, and like I said, it was like my early 20s, and like in some form or another, that group's been going ever since.
That's awesome. Um, yeah, incredible actually to keep a group together that long. Um, I learned to play when I was about 14, right around the same time that Magic the Gathering first came out. And I had kind of started getting into Magic the Gathering a little bit, but we were playing that on a Boy Scout trip.
Yeah.
And my Scoutmaster at the time happened to see what we were playing, and he was like, "What is this?" And we were kind of explaining it to him. He was like, "That sounds a lot like a game that I used to play when I was in Scouts called D&D." And we were like, "What is that?" And he started talking to us about it, and he started running a game for us. And we only got to play like twice a year,
Yeah.
but it was awesome. I had a lot of fun. And then whenever I went to college, I found a group that we started playing with, and it was all theater people. So it showed me a completely different side of the game, and I was like, "This game is incredible. You can do all of this under one umbrella. That's fantastic." And shortly after that, likewise, I think I was 21. I had got a place of my own, me and my girlfriend, now wife. And I asked her, I was like, "I really want to start hosting a D&D group to play every week." And we talked about it, and she was okay with it. So since then, we've been playing, like I said, for about 20 years now, regularly. And a lot of the people that make up that group, and now their spouses, are still a part of that group. So it's a really tight knit family, and it's a very special part of my life. And I think that's one of the reasons why I am in as deep into the hobby as I am, is because that group has maintained itself for so long.
Yeah, I mean, there aren't many other hobbies where I feel like you can say the same thing, about, this hobby, like, really brings people together. And, and the cool thing is, like, when you meet somebody new, you're like, you instantly have a thing to talk about. And it's, before you know it, you're talking to the person and you feel like you've known them all your life because you have so much, shared interests.
Yeah, I think that shared experience is a huge thing that we need psychologically. Knowing that somebody else has been through something similar to us is um, a huge relief psychologically. And even though we understand that all of the things that we've played through at the table are all fantasy and make believe, there's so much of a strong analogy in our minds between it and like the real challenges that we face in life, that our brain fools us into feeling like we've actually lived those experiences, especially the ones that are really standout moments. And so, in your mind, these people sitting next to you, you've bled with, you've saved their life, they've saved your life. And those kinds of, that trick of psychology where it's almost real in your memory, forms the same kinds of bonds of brotherhood that you find in people who served in war together. People who will 60 years later still be writing to each other every day or every week or what have you, because of that shared experience that they've gone through.
Yeah, when people tell stories about their D&D characters, right? Oftentimes they'll speak in first person. Even gamers that don't role play in first person, will kind of like speak in first person, talking about their character and what our group did. So yeah, that's definitely one of the fun and interesting things about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think because it's, at least through most of its history, it's been such a niche community that finding someone else who is a part of that community is it's not a rare thing anymore, but it's a rare bond that you can form with someone and be like, "Oh, you like role playing games? Oh, that's cool. What do you play?" Because the term role playing game, and even the term just Dungeons and Dragons, is such a vastly different set of experiences. One group plays this way, some other groups play this way, that it's interesting to find out where the similarities and the differences lie with the person that you've just started talking to.
No, I completely agree. And it's like that, a fun like discovery phase too, as you're trying to figure out, like, is this a person I would want to game with? Will our styles gel?
It's like blind dating.
Yeah.
I don't want to date you, Dave. No, sorry,
But like,
you're not my type.
damn. But it's like nowadays it's so much easier because like there's a plethora of choices, especially if you're open to gaming online. And like, now you can find, gaming cafes and, gaming bars. It's like, I had the guys on today from the Homebrew Crew, and they were talking about that they play, at basically a gaming tavern where they have a back room that they open up to people to use for D&D, but they also have like, other games there and stuff as well.
That's cool. That's really, really cool. I've always thought that that would be a really neat business model, serve drinks or coffee or, snacks, bar food, that kind of stuff, and also have gaming. And a couple of years ago when I first started hearing about gaming taverns and bars that were doing gaming, and I was like, that's smart. That's really smart. And I think because of, I don't know, I think it's been kind of a lightning in a bottle type thing. I think online gaming, D&D 5e launching, things like Critical Role and Acquisitions Inc., I think they really formed a strong influx of fresh blood into the community. And I've never seen the gaming hobby doing as well as it is now. It's
and there's some other little things too, like Stranger Things and Big Bang Theory. So like it's been kind of like worming its way into pop culture, so people are more familiar with it. It's like if you say Dungeons and Dragons to a Muggle, right? They still they like most of the time. I want to say like 8 out of 10 times they'll have an idea in their head what it is. It might not be right, but like it conjures imagery for them, So like the D&D brand has gotten so big now and become so much more mainstream. We have all kinds of celebrities that are coming out, talking about playing games and gaming, and also coming back to the hobby, or at least opening up their experiences with the hobby to the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's been pretty incredible to watch. Again, having been a gamer for so long, and I came in on the tail end of the stigma, where the Satanic Panic happened and things like that. I was much too young, thankfully, to have been at the receiving end of any of that. But there was definitely still that stigma of, if you're a gamer, you're this type of person, and that's it. You have glasses and you're overweight and you have
you live in your mom's
hair.
basement.
You live in your mom's basement. Exactly. Yeah.
Wait a minute, I do have glasses. I am overweight. And I do have
you were right. No.
You'll call it out.
No, man. I think it's been really, really wonderful, honestly, to see so many more people embracing it openly and talking about it, and at least gaining a more firm understanding as to what RPGs really are, what the hobby's truly about. It's been awesome. So, okay. So first up, I'm going to grab a question that was posted before by Doug. I'm not going to pronounce his last name. Sorry, Vahovic.
It's Vahovic, yeah.
Vahovic.
Doug's a plant. He's our content director.
Yeah. I talked to Doug a little bit right before I came on y'all's live talk show.
Yeah.
So Doug has asked, how many campaigns have started since Nerdarchy began?
There's so many. I mean, we must have close to a dozen just on the channel, right? That we've played, and then there's the ones that we played that we play off stream. I mean, I think Ted is running his third game, because we each had one that ran a long time, like 5 years, where we took the characters from 1st to 20th. And he's on his third campaign. I'm on my second. And then there's like all the ones that we've put up on the channel where we've done like mini series where it's like 4 to 6, 4 to 6 sessions. So they're short arcs. And then also Ted has been running a game once a month over on the channel for years now, I feel like. And then for a long time, I ran the Scarlet Sisterhood, which went for like 66 episodes or something like that, where we were doing that weekly. So yeah, like I said, we got to be close to a dozen different campaigns, and then like I don't know if that doesn't probably include like my stint on Save Our Dice where I played in. We ran three or no, maybe 4 or 5 campaigns there since Nerdarchy started. No, it might be closer to 20. A lot. We play a lot of games.
That's fantastic. Yeah, somebody asked me that question the other day. How many campaigns? It was a broad question stated to a group that I'm in on Facebook, and I sat down and tried to think about it, and I was like, I don't know that I can think of all the campaigns that I've at least started.
Yeah.
How many I finished is probably a more finite number. But yeah, like it's a lot.
Yeah, I was actually excluding ones that we didn't finish.
Yeah,
because there's a ton of those as well. Do you find? I'll ask you a question.
Sure.
Tables are turned. Do you find by streaming games you're finishing more games, like campaigns?
I have a fairly decent track record of finishing the campaigns that I start. Just because as a storyteller, like I feel unsatisfied unless I finish a story, and as long as there's at least 50% of the players present, like we're gonna play, and I'm gonna run. If I'm DMing, I'm gonna run the game. So I have finished 1, 2, 3. I just finished my 4th campaign on my channel last week. No, 2 weeks ago. No, and I haven't started. Oh, I say that I haven't started any that I haven't finished that I'm not currently playing. I have one that I am still running, and it's been running for just over 2 years now. But I do plan on finishing that one as long as the players are still willing to play.
I found by us changing the way we start our games, it's greatly increased our ratio of finished games, right? That's been like a huge part of it for us. Like we were notorious for starting campaigns and never finishing them, and like we've had more discarded campaigns than anything. It wasn't until we started doing Nerdarchy and also like opened ourselves up to running session zeros and really like kind of drilling down on what the scheme's going to be, how long is it going to last, what's the objective. That's helped a lot for us for having games that go to completion.
Yeah, and I think online gaming does lend itself towards having a campaign that ends more so than meeting in person for the same kind of reasons that we were talking about earlier, where meeting in person, one of the main objectives of getting together is really kind of that socialization, spending time with your friends. And with it typically being a more casual approach, sometimes I think that doesn't demand the same kind of level of commitment from a lot of people. It's, I don't really feel like it, so I'm not going to go today. I'm not going to go this week or whatever. Whereas, with playing online, especially if there is an audience that's watching, there's a level of commitment that you need to be present. You need to be there. And when you sit down, it's go time. And I think that focus can help drive a narrative towards a conclusion faster.
Yeah, that definitely helps. I mean, I know people that started streams as a way to try and get their games to be more regular and consistent. And it does work. But you know what? Like, if you take the same approach to a stream as you do like your in-person game, it can have similar effects. Like, one of the things is, like, for us anyway, we game 3 Saturdays out of the 4, right, in the month, or 5 depending on the month or whatever. But it's like Ted will run a game, somebody else runs a game, and I'll run a game, and we kind of rotate through GMs. But before we start, we go, all right, how many sessions are we going to do? Like, how many, how long is this campaign? And it doesn't mean like if we go, like we've been doing clips of 12, so it takes a year, right, to even get through it. But that being said, like, at the end, there's no reason why you can't continue playing with those characters, right? But we just make another agreement, like, oh, we're going to do it for another 6, we're going to do it for another 12, and I think it makes it less daunting for the GM. I mean, the fact that we do it, we're gaming like once a month also makes it less daunting, and we rotate through. It takes a long time to get through your stories that way, but also for us, it's what we found that works for making sure our games go to the end. Like, Ted ran a game that lasted 5 years. We went 1 through 20. And we really didn't do that as much. The only objective was to get to 20. We're going to take it to the conclusion, 20th level. And it happened. After that, we started a new game, and we're like, well, how long do we want to run this for? And we set 12 sessions. We ran it to its completion. It was done. And then the question was, hey, do you want to keep going with these characters or do something new? The group was actually split on what they wanted to do. So half of us kept playing our characters, and the other half started new characters. But the campaign took up later, at a later time in the timeline of when we were playing, and the old characters went to a new part of the world, and but again, when we started, we're like, well, how long is this going to go, right? And then once we get to the end of this, we'll probably do something similar, like, are we going to keep going, or are we going to start a new campaign? And that's been super helpful for us.
Yeah, I think that is a good idea, to allow the people who want to change, who get that kind of 7-year itch, if you will, and want to shift to a different style of character or a different personality or a different class. I think it's healthy to give people that option, or to stick with what they know and what they're comfortable with.
Also, too, like the other thing I think it does is, like, when we do that, like, everyone that's signing on for that campaign up front, they know they just signed on for 12 sessions, right? So they've just committed to it. When it's just like, we get together every Saturday, I'll be there, or I won't be there, I feel like it's a lot less committal, and people don't feel as obligated. But when we start out and go, like, we're going to do this amount of times, and it kind of sets it in stone, and we've definitely have had much better consistency through that. Also, if you throw in a pandemic, that kind of helps too, because like we're like playing virtually, so everyone, like, you don't really have an excuse not to be there, because no one's really going anywhere, and you just have to walk to your computer.
Just to put a little bit of a damper on your social life. Those of us who have a social life, my social life was pretty much online gaming to start with, or gaming in person with my friends, and that's the only part of it that I'm missing, is gaming with my friends. That's really good advice. Establishing a schedule is very helpful in a lot of ways. It ends up taking a lot of the guesswork out of it.
Yeah, well, too, for us, like, so me and Ted have always been much more committed than most of the groups we belong to. And by us, like, pulling out, like, going, oh, I'll run, you run. And they're essentially different groups, right? So there's not that much crossover between these different groups other than me and Ted. You're also only asking people for one Saturday out of the month. So, which obviously this might not be an ideal situation for everyone. We are just really fortunate that we have a lot of different people that we can draw from to play with, that we've met locally, that, because these are our home games that are supposed to be in person, just, hasn't been able to happen that way for a while. So by also making someone to commit to one day a month, also, like, they might not be gaming that much, and if they don't show up, they're like missing their monthly game, right? So that also has helped.
Yeah, that's very true. Having a wide pool of people to be able to draw from, so that you can game multiple times, is definitely something that I have discovered through gaming online. There's such a, like you were talking about, just a wide community of people from all over the world, and being able to find a select few people who want the same kind of things out of the game that you do, you can cultivate a really good group that way. And the games are incredibly rewarding.
Well, what size is your normal group?
My home group, we have 7 people total. Throughout the years, it's fluctuated pretty wildly. At the most, we had 12 people at once, and that was just insanity.
Yeah, that's brutal. Like we've had similar tables, and now we're down to like 5 or 6, and we've just been trying to keep it down to that amount. Like that's a good number, especially now that we're online.
Yeah, online, I cap my games at 5 players, unless I have like a guest that's coming on just for like an episode to play like a villain or something. I have found that tends to be kind of the sweet spot for having enough screen time for everybody to like speak and take turns with their character while not making it feel bloated, like there's just too much going on, or that the turns are too short. Yeah. So that's typically what I run with online. Cool. So we mentioned earlier session zeros, and session zeros are kind of a little bit of a newer addition to the broader hobby landscape, where you have an open table, just in case people aren't aware of what a session zero is. You have an open table discussion about the expectations, the house rules, boundaries, safety tools, desires for the game, et cetera, et cetera. In your mind, how important is having a session zero?
I think it's good to get everyone on the same page, right? Even if and there's different ways you can do that. Like it could be you getting together like you're going to game, or it could be you could have a chat someplace that you hammer everything out in before you guys start playing. But especially in a group where maybe not everyone knows each other, I think it's kind of cool to get everyone together, make characters together, conceptually talk about your characters, figure out, how everyone knows each other when you start the game. I mean, that used to be a nightmare as a GM or DM, as you would be like, okay, I've got these 12 players and I have to figure out how they're going to all get together. And because everyone created their character independently of each other. And oh my God, like Andrew Knapp, SR2 Joker. I don't know if he does anything anymore, but he used to have a YouTube channel. And when I listen to him go, I don't get my players together anymore, I make them do it, I was like, oh my God, that's genius. It only took me like 20 years to figure that out. That you as the GM don't have to do it. But also it does several things. One is it starts lowering the number of players that go, my character wouldn't do that. And two, it lets them build the bonds between each other. And I think that's something that's really important to do in a session zero, is let the players connect their characters to each other, so they care about the other characters going into the game, instead of having to develop that almost artificially during the game. And I don't know how many games I've been into going, why would any of these people even be together? Especially in the first or second session, right? Sure, it makes sense after you've been adventuring together for a little while, but in the very beginning, it's kind of asinine. But I think if you remove the burden from the GM and discuss it as part of the game going forward, you all kind of start as, the companions of the Lance from Dragonlance, meeting up.
Yeah, I tend to ask a lot from my players up front. And a lot of that is covered in a session zero, or, a little before or a little after a session zero as well. And I think they're imperative. I don't typically do a session zero for a very short game, like a 1, 2, or a 3 shot. But anything beyond that, I think it's imperative. And I'll never go back to not doing them again.
Yeah, one shots, I don't do them for one shots. To me, people go crazy with the one shots sometimes. They show up with their 15-page backstory and they're like, do you guys want to all connect this and that? And I'm like, I'm gonna play this game and never touch this character again, probably. So it's not that big. One of the things I like to do would take some of my time too as a GM for starting a campaign, is I like to show up with 4 pitches and be like, yo, here are some games I would like to run. and like here's kind of a synopsis and what you might need to know to start off. Are you interested in any of these? And then, and then the players can kind of like vote or decide amongst themselves. Because one, it's really important as the GM to not rope yourself into a game that you do not want to play, right? It's the most important that the GM is on board for the game that they're running, and then after that, you need player buy-in, and then want to play that game as well.
Yeah, it's become a rule of thumb for me, in my mind at least, that you have to be, as a GM, you have to be the most excited person at the table. If you're not, then the game's going to end up probably falling flat. Now, other players can be excited, but they're never going to be as excited as you are. At least that's the way it should be, because you set the tone, like emotionally and socially at the table as a GM. Everybody else feeds off of you for their cues. So if you come to the table and you're full of energy and hyped and eager and excited, then other people are going to pick up on that, and it's going to elevate everybody else's experience at the table. But if you come to
it goes the other way too, right? Like if you're not excited, if you don't really want to be here and you're like, ugh, I'm playing this game again, like that, that starts to carry through as well.
Absolutely. People can sense that. And even if they don't realize it consciously, that they're cueing off of that, it'll happen. And the whole table will drop.
It's like a marriage where they stay together for the kids, but they hate each other. And it's like, nah, the kids know you hate each other. So
yes, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, I think session zeros are really, really handy. There's something that I started doing a couple of years ago, and it's especially with playing, like you said, with people online, people that you might not know very much.
Yeah.
I think it's imperative because you don't know what somebody else has been through, what somebody else might not enjoy playing through at the table, and giving people the chance to kind of say, I'd rather not have anything like this in the game, is just as important as somebody saying, oh man, I really, really want to have, a large pitched battle with cavalry and archery and everything. Both of those things are equally important to know before you start building the foundation of your campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I've built whole campaigns off of like just asking players like, well, what do you want to get out of this campaign? What is something you want to happen maybe that hasn't happened in your other games, or you like that happened before, or things that you don't like. I mean, the Scarlet Sisterhood game that I ran was like, someone was like, I want to fight troglodytes. I'm like, okay. I mean, that's oddly specific, but I can make that work. and like, then like the first half of that campaign was all about, this basically drug lord that was enslaving troglodytes in order to harvest their glands to make a drug called stank. That then when people would go through withdrawal, when they would stop taking it, they would like turn into troglodytes. So like the watch started picking up people that are going through withdrawal, and they'd end up in the stank tank. So like the players are like trying to track down this like criminal and figure out like, is there a cure for the junkies that have been converted into troglodytes? And then they also got like sympathetic towards the troglodytes too, because they were kind of victims, but at the same time they're still troglodytes, so they weren't really great creatures either. So.
But I love taking those kinds of knobs that the players are giving you, and being able to twist and turn them behind the scenes and make something more than the sum of its parts. I love that aspect of DMing for sure.
Well, the other thing too is it allows the players some agency in the game they're going to be playing, and then you get so much more buy-in from them.
Yes, yeah, that is direct investment. I have control over something, and it's going to come back later, like we're going to see it again. Then yeah, I mean, even me as a player, I get excited about seeing that kind of stuff from a dungeon master. The investment goes through the roof if I know that what I'm doing is going to have real long-lasting effect on the game and the story that we're telling. So we kind of touched on it a little bit, but how much input from your players do you ask for before a campaign begins? Do you use more of a module style approach where it's kind of any group of adventurers can play through the same story, or are the backgrounds and the makeups of your PCs more intertwined with the story from the very beginning?
Like somewhere's in between that, right? Like the game we're playing now, was I gave them like 4 pitches and they picked one, and then we did the session 0, sort of formulating the characters around that. So like that one is definitely way more based on the characters. Like the whole opening arc has been about a mentor. Like 4 of the 5 players share, right? And so that's made it like super easy. They're all vested in figuring out this mystery around their mentor, and because they made up the mentor, they told me about the mentor, and filled in some of the blanks, and they named them, right. So now they kind of want to figure out what's going on with that. So I think mostly that's how I do it, even if it's a campaign where I don't know where it's going, which I've definitely done that. Is I'll throw out a bunch of plot hooks and see which ones really jive with the party. The game that I ran from first level to 20th level in 5e, it was really it's the only one that I've ever run from beginning to end. Like for the first, I want to say 5 levels ish, there was no overarching plot. It wasn't until that a couple of the characters were dragonborn, and there were no dragonborn in the world that they were in, but these 2 ended up there. They found a way back to their world. The rest of the group came with them. There was a portal, and now a sect of dragonborn did not want this intermingling of dragonborn and other races. So they formed like a terrorist cell. And then when I was like, hey, there's this famous dragonborn general, and like the dragonborn players really took to that. They're like, when they realized like that was the leader of the terrorist cell and this terrorist sect, it's as if I betrayed them personally, not their characters, and they totally bought into it. And from there, we were able to take some twists and turns, but it really stemmed from that, and led us to what would become the overarching theme for that world. Was an invasion by I call them Vargarians, but they're my Arcanaborg, right? And this terror sect summoned them, and then they got incorporated into them. So like they're like, it was like the campaign oh shit moment, and they're like, oh, we need to stop this, and and that kind of like drove the rest of that game. But yeah, so like a lot of times my style is to throw out all kinds of plot hooks. Like I definitely use the shotgun or blunderbuss approach, and then like whatever they gravitate towards, that's what we'll use, and I'll throw away all the other plot hooks, or maybe have them resurface as subplots, or side quests. But for the most part, I try and give them as many choices as possible, and see what they want to do, and then do that. Because I find if you do anything else, you're not going to get as much buy-in from your players, and they're not going to take your hooks. They're not going to want to go. They're not going to venture and do the things, because you made it about your story and not about what the characters and players want to do.
It's very true. Yeah, a few years ago, I started doing a lot of things that I pulled from Will Wheaton's game that he ran called Titan's Grave. He did a lot of really cool stuff that I liked, and I started incorporating it into my D&D games, and that is to establish a connection with another PC. These are all things that I ask for from my players. Give me at least 2 different NPC connections. They can be positive connections, negative connections, weak connections, strong connections, whatever. Give me a secret. It doesn't have to be anything that your character is even necessarily aware of, just that something that is involving them that is not, broad knowledge. if they want to have a trinket, I look for ways to try to incorporate that and make it more important than just a, strange little thing that they happen to have with them. I have a thing that I started doing called the cope list, where I have a video about it on the channel here, but it's the commonalities of player expectations. So I asked them, what does this campaign need for you to feel like, this particular culture or this particular genre, or what is it that you're looking for out of this campaign? And I kind of culminate all of that into a list. And every time one of the entries gets another hit, it rises in the list. And that way I have a shopping list of the things at the very, very top that are aggregated up. That's the things that are the most common that they're wanting to experience in the game. So that's what I'm going to have the most of in the game, is these things at the top of the list. And then I can work my way down through it. And then the other thing that I do is I actually craft a questionnaire for each of the characters, and I use very pointed questions. And I got that idea from a book called Dread. This is a fantastic little horror RPG, and throughout the entire book, on the bottom of every single page, there are these very, very, very pointed questions, like, why has your life not been the same since you escaped from the big bad wolf? Why were you named after your cousin instead of after your grandmother? They're very leading questions, and they assume a lot. But when you ask these kinds of questions of players, they will surprise you with the kind of answer that they give you. So I send those questionnaires to them, and I have all of this other information that I compile, and it's a lot. But what that ends up having, or what that ends up giving me as a dungeon master, is a fully stocked pantry that I can then go and grab the ingredients that I'm looking for and say, oh, I'm going to mix this from, player B and the secret from player C. And I'm also going to grab this other thing that I found from somebody's questionnaire. And now those are all going to be involved together somehow. And when I pull that one plot hook, all three of those people are going to respond strongly to it, because it's all information that they gave me to work with.
Yeah, that is super important. And that's like the failing of a lot of GMs when we get questions. It's like, like one of the popular ones is like, my players won't take my hooks. And it always comes down to, well, it's because you're giving them your hooks and not theirs, right? If you bait the hooks with their stuff, they're like, they know, right? They know that was there for, they know it's there for them, and they're gonna want to do it.
Yeah, the first rule of fishing is you got to know what you're fishing for.
Yeah.
And you have to pick the right bait, otherwise the fish aren't going to bite. And if your players literally walked up to you with a plate full of bait and said, "Here you go. This is what I want to. This is what I want to do. Use it to torture me." It works. It really does work.
Yeah. So Doug in the chat is like kind of. He says a lot of times, he's there just trying to facilitate the story that the players want to tell. And I feel like that's probably how I've always kind of GM'd. He just articulated it way better than I could have. And like, that's where you find the sweet spot of, running games that are more successful and players being more active and wanting to do more things in the game. Right. It's just you giving them things to interact with. And the more things you can give them that they kind of conceptually helped come up with, the more likely they are to do just that.
Yeah. And D&D players are sadists. Like they absolutely want you to hurt them. And if they give you an NPC, do something tragic to them. I have been thoroughly surprised by how many times I have done that, and at the end of the session that player has said, "That was amazing, that was fantastic, please, I want to do more of that kind of stuff in the game." It's incredible.
So like, I feel like yes and no there, right? Like, I feel you should do it in a way that they can interact with, not in a way where it's just them having information dumped on them about the bad things you've done to these things they made, right? Because then it doesn't feel like it has anything to do with them anymore. It's just you as the GM kind of like ham-fisting your way through it. But if you do it in a way where you want to threaten the NPCs they care about, but in a way where they can have an opportunity to engage and do something about it, then it's more meaningful than, oh, you go home for this festival. The farm has been burnt down and they're all dead, including the young ones. So
that's a very good distinction, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Yeah, giving them the opportunity to take part in whatever demise or threat that is taking place is always the best course, I have found.
Yeah, like if you want to have like their family farm overrun or hometown overrun, put them there before it gets overrun. Put them there like, the week of that it's going to happen. And then things begin, getting worse and going bad. And then the players have to live and die by all their decisions. And also, the NPCs they care about are living and dying about their decisions. Give a little time to get to know those NPCs even more, as well as, maybe some new NPCs that are, somehow connected or related to the ones that they originally gave you, and let it build up a little bit. And then, then have the marauders encircle the town, and, the players have to figure out what they're going to do about it.
That's great advice. Absolutely. We're going to go ahead and get in this question from Cole. She asks, what wrong impressions do muggles have? I have been told, I thought there was a board, going back to people's
absolutely.
Misconceptions about the game.
I think that's probably the most popular one, right? That's not insane. Like, is that it's a board game. And then there is people that still do believe we were worshiping the devil. But, what are you going to do?
Yeah, there's some people that just they're just not worth talking to.
Yeah,
past a certain point.
I know some people that, like, one of the reasons that they came up with like online personas is because they didn't want people in their professional life to interact or be aware of like their gaming life, because they live in the Bible Belt or something,
Sure.
And they felt that it might actually affect them professionally. So, but I think for the most part, it is like I guess the other one is like they think everyone dresses up, right? Like they think it's LARP, kind of.
Yeah, I may be guilty of that, but I won't comment.
You're the one that perpetrated that stereotype.
Oh, at least online, for sure. Yeah. I'll wear all kinds of goofy hats and shit. So, yeah, we have another question from Cole. I'm going to go ahead. I am going to add to the question here. I had a cousin that used to play with us on a weekly basis. Years later, like at least a decade or more later, his sister was talking to me about the game, and she said, I thought it was a video game that you guys were playing this whole time. And I'm like, no, that would have been one hell of a video game we've been playing for like a decade on a weekly basis. No, it's not a video game, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of wild assumptions about D&D, but most of them are incorrect. Cole also asks, does having an audience change how you play or run your games?
Absolutely. And it also changed how, in some ways, it changed how I run and play my games offline too, to be honest with you. One is like you have to be aware that when you're streaming a game, it's also a show. And so there's different things that go into that. Everything from casting to like, what faces do you want to show on your stream? Do you care about things like showing representation and having, a variety of people playing the game with you or not? When you're in the game itself, it's like, you want to be entertaining. And I honestly think there's a lot of things about D&D that is not entertaining to watch, right? Like the things that I actually would get the most bored about in a Critical Role stream was the D&D things, not like necessarily the other. Now I enjoy playing that and being at a table with that, but like, you know, the combats were actually the least exciting part to me when, you know, when we were watching them and reviewing them for a while. I'm not a big fan of watching stream games, but when I do watch them, it's the interactions between the GM and the players that I enjoy. So one of the things that I do when I do a stream game is I try not to do the typical start with like, here's so-and-so and their characters, this, that, and the other thing. So like at the beginning of a stream campaign, I go media res, I start with action. And I try and incorporate the descriptions and the information about the characters in, you know, in the opening scene, allowing them to do it and having it done through the interaction of the game. Like we did a game for Cypher System called Moon Rises, and Doug was actually playing an astronaut, retro astronaut character, complete with big, you know, shiny fishbowl head. Right. So like a lot of the descriptions kind of got like told through being reflected off of his visor, you know, and them just having things going on. And then we kind of slowed down and, you know, then introduced the players or whatever. But I like doing that. I like having the players do a recap in a stream game. So for people to know what's going on. And one, too, like it shows you what they're excited about and what they got from like the last session that happened. And like things like that can actually just be useful in general for your game. And I like to end on a cliffhanger whenever I can for several reasons. One, like it's just better entertainment and to end with a cliffhanger. Two, as the GM, I can just make up something, but I don't actually have to figure out for a week or a month or whatever my game is coming up next to what that actually meant, right? And I do that all the time where I do this cliffhanger and I have no idea where it's going. I haven't actually thought it out. It's not a finished or completed encounter. It's just like, here's a thing that we end on, and then I'll think about it for the next week.
Yeah, and I think my answer to the question would be somewhat similar, that running games online has made me aware of things that I might not have necessarily been aware of running games in person. But it is different. Having an audience changes the way that I run a game typically. For at the very, very basic level, just because I have to put in, well, I don't have to, I choose to put in more production on the games that I run online. I'm creating an overlay. I'm, you know, thinking about framing of where I'm putting all of the people. I think about the party composition, not necessarily the race and class that everybody is playing, but the actual composition of players and how their styles and personalities are going to mesh with one another within a game. For a one shot, that's not necessarily all that important, but for a campaign, to me, it is a fundamental issue that needs to be considered. Because if you have somebody who is a very strong power gamer, very much into the rules and building an optimized character class, and then you're putting them in a game with a person who could care less about most of that stuff and really just wants to ad-lib emotional role-playing scenes, there's going to be a disconnect at some point between those two players, and you're going to have to mitigate that later as a dungeon master. But if you are aware of that going in, then you can build a much healthier environment for the game where the players' styles are going to complement one another. And that's all stuff that I definitely consider whenever I'm running a game for an audience, as opposed to running it just in my home.
Yeah, like the power gamer, optimizer, tactician player might actually be a good player for a stream game. Like it's a different play style where you can mitigate those and make them work at your home table fine, and it's easy to share things. Share the spotlight, it's a different dynamic. So, you know, when you're running a stream game, you need people that actually want to, you know, they want to play the game in front of an audience. You know, it's just it's a different level of buy-in.
Absolutely. And likewise for me, I have to consider things like pace and things like keeping combats short and snappy. Where you're at the table, everybody might be super into a combat that lasts for an hour and a half, and everybody is having their little side conversations while so and so is taking their turn and all of that kind of stuff. And that works at a table in person. But online, if you're running a combat that's lasting an hour and a half, that has to be an incredibly riveting combat. Otherwise, your audience is not going to be there. They're not going to be interested.
Hopefully, players are trying to do things interesting. Otherwise, it's just a slog and it's kind of boring. And also, like, I know, like, I hated watching Sam Riegel in combat. Because I was like, why are you not sneak attack? Why aren't you hiding? Why aren't you doing these rogue things? Definitely like, armchair quarterbacking. So like, and also I was like, I know for that reason too, I'm not a very good viewer. And that's not a knock on Sam. Like, everyone should enjoy the game the way they do. I'm just a terrible viewer.
Everybody has their tastes. Everybody likes what they like, and there's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, okay, moving right along. Speaking of everybody having their own preferences, I've heard a lot of people knock the trope of starting a campaign in a tavern.
Yeah.
In your opinion, is this something that you should avoid or embrace, and why?
Tropes are tropes for a reason. They're popular. People understand them. And when you implement a trope, right, they understand what's going on. Like, everyone has a preconceived notion of what this is, right? Now, it doesn't mean you have to start it the same way, every time. It's like, you could start it in a tavern and be like, hey, you guys, for whatever reason, you guys were at the tavern grabbing your ale, your mead, whatever, Oh, by the way, it's on fire now. It's a blazing inferno. What do? People are screaming. Someone just, went down in front of you because one of the crossbeams fell. So, like, that's starting in a tavern still, but it's not the same, right? Like, you can set the scene in a way where the players expect it to be typical, and then you can turn it on its head.
Absolutely. Starting with a trope gives you a fantastic foundation. Just like a picture is worth 1,000 words. Using a trope and leaning into a trope establishes so much work up front. Like you said, your players understand what's going on. They're like, oh, I recognize the kind of scene that we're in now, or I recognize the type of person that's supposed to be. What I'm supposed to understand from them linking this NPC to this trope is blank, blank, blank. But then, as a dungeon master or as a storyteller in general, then you twist it. You use those expectations to surprise the player by doing something unexpected with them. Start with the trope and then change it. Okay. We got a question from Jason Smith. I'm going to go ahead and grab this. He says, do you find it challenging to keep from going too far into the weeds with any given campaign? I find a lot of difficulty staying with the central concept when I go far enough along.
So to that, I would say probably what's happened is you've done something, or your players have done something that they found more interesting than whatever the central concept was or is, right? And at that point, you have two choices. You can try and get them back on track, or you can explore the new thing and see where it goes. Personally, I generally just tend to go with the new thing because they've kind of shown interest in that. Now, you could have the old thing happening in the background. Like, I've been reading Monster of the Week, and they have, like, the building a mystery happens in 6 phases. And the concept is you're building the mystery out as what would happen if the players never got involved, right? And, like, the beats come up based on based on specific things in the mystery, not the players, right? But now you might have to react to the players meddling or changing those beats. I mean, ideally that's what you want. And like a D&D campaign is really the same. It's like you come up with this overarching plan, and when it starts to fall apart is when you start trying to predict what your players are going to do, because players are very unpredictable and you never know what's going to hold their attention. So like you can take that same kind of thing where you do these like broad sweeps of, this is what happens at these different junctures, and depending on what the players do, like that could change or alter that. But if they go in a new direction, it just kind of unfolds in the background, or maybe another adventuring party has to deal with it. But I wouldn't sweat it. And it's also why I am an opponent of doing a lot of work up front on a campaign, because I just don't know where it's going to go. And I've done it in the past. You plot everything out, 1 through level 10 or 20 or whatever you want to do. But, you never get to those final levels, so it doesn't actually matter. So I like to hone in and focus on what my players are doing now and only think a couple steps ahead of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of link the way I DM to the analogy of almost like GPS in a car. Like I set where I want to end up. I want to have a bad guy fight the big bad evil confrontation in a burning cathedral, and the bad guy is a giant werewolf. I set my sights on a goal, and then the entire campaign I build towards that. And everything that the players do, every decision that they make, I take that and put it through the filter of how can I get that to still end where I'm aiming. And I might not end up at that exact point, but as long as that's my heading, that's my bearing, I can construct a story that feels complete for me and ends in a very specific spot and feels like a completed narrative. It feels like a strong beginning, middle, and end by the time it's all told.
And like you can do that with 1 to 3 sentences per beat, right? And then so you're not super vested once the players throw you a curveball and like, oh, I guess we're not doing that anymore. Or like you're trying to strong arm them back in because you spent all this time working on it. It's kind of how I feel about Dwarven Forge. When I see this huge, amazing setup, I'm like, you go through hours of setting that up. It's like your players, are they going to feel obligated as a GM? Do you feel obligated to try and figure out how to get them into this mega dungeon you just spent hours building?
Oh yeah, as a terrain crafter, that is a pain that I know all too well. Yeah. You build a set and you're like, let's not go there, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, they're like, we want to hang out in the tavern with Bebo the Goblin Jester all session.
It happens. But I think to kind of piggyback on what you were just saying, leaving a lot of your beats malleable and soft with a lot of holes to it, incomplete, is important, because that way you can change and adapt it far more easier than if you set everything in stone. Like if you just have it as a simple idea of, like you said, 2 or 3 sentences, a kind of sky view of what you want, then it's a lot easier for you to constantly change little bits and pieces of it so that it still can happen while honoring everything that's happened in the story so far and the choices that your players have made.
And sometimes too, I just want to say, sometimes your players just have better ideas. And
absolutely.
I know that may be hard to believe, right? And for some of us to set aside our ego, but if someone has a better idea, I'm going to do that, right? And in one of the twists and turns that the Scarlet Sister campaign took was the players, in order to get one of the ingredients to the antidote, they needed to haggle with hags. And they were on their way, and I was literally going to just be like, all right, they're going to give them a quest or something. But on the way there, one of the players is like, I bet we're not going to be able to just buy this ingredient. This is going to be some fairy tale stuff. And I was like, huh, it It is now. You know, so like they had to trade like memories and dreams and stuff, you know, for the ingredients on set, which then like sent ripples throughout the campaign, and you know, for them, and created more problems for them to solve. But you know, like I didn't come up with any of that; they did. So you know, one of my favorite expressions is you have one mouth and two ears, so you should listen twice as much as you talk. And I, you know, as a GM, like that is probably like my number one piece of advice. And you know, for players, talk out loud in front of your GMs, because the good ones are listening, and they're not going to weaponize that against you. They're going to use it to help you tell stories that you want to tell.
Yeah, I agree. The best DMs are the ones who are the biggest cheerleaders for their players. By all means, challenge them, put them through the ringer, but in the end, you should want their victory to be sweet. You should revel in the fact that they have finally triumphed over the obstacles that you've put forth before them. That's why we're doing this. It's their story. It's the story of these heroes triumphing, or you know, coming close and having a Pyrrhic victory at the very least. And I think that starts with willingly playing into the narrative over your particular part in the story, if that makes sense. So like as a player, understand that you might be walking into a trap, but do it anyways. If it makes sense for the story, if it's going to make a more interesting encounter for you to just walk headlong into that trap because your character didn't see it, but you know that it's there. Like, and the adverse of that is, as a dungeon master, don't punish your players for revealing their plan. Like, you know, challenge them, use it to challenge them, but ultimately have that idea pay off, because then that's going to encourage that behavior at your table.
So I'm looking at the chat, and you know, Cole mentions, you know, my daughter always says things like, "Mom is spying. This means something horrible is about to happen to us." You know, it's a werewolf, isn't it? And you know, and meanwhile, I'm just enjoying myself, but now there's a werewolf. And you know, the great part about that is it gives the players, like, they feel so much smarter because they figured it out, right? But they figured it out because you changed it to what their expectations were, and then you can start twisting those expectations and kind of making them your own. So it's not like you're just giving them what they want; you're giving them what they want through your lens, right? You can then turn that in, and they like, yeah, it is a werewolf, but maybe, you know, maybe that's not a werewolf to fight. Maybe that's a werewolf they have to cure. Maybe you know, they do fight the werewolf, they don't kill it, and it turns into someone they knew, you know, something along those lines. So like you can really like twist and play with those expectations a lot.
Absolutely. And I have typically found that when you have one thing that you want to be true, oh my gosh, it's the werewolf, and something else that you were already planning to be true, it was actually, you know, the town, you know, reeve or whatever. If you take those two ideas and find a way that they can both be true together, then it creates so much of a much stronger story beat than if you just had both of those things happen independently of one another. So now, you know, the town reeve is the werewolf and is in charge of this crazy scheme that they are now thwarting. The ripples from that kind of design is far more reaching through a story than if you're just allowing single little things to be true here and there and trying to constantly figure out what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, people like to be right too, right? So let them, right? Like it, just because they guessed the thing that you're doing, whether it's because you changed it or because they really guessed it, doesn't make you a lesser DM or a GM or storyteller. What you did is you just made your players a little bit happier, right? Again, investing them in your story even more. So,
absolutely. And again, that's a sign of a great DM, being able to adapt, being able to adjust and do so quickly, and being able to do so. And in the end, it looks like it was all planned from the beginning.
We like the one campaign Ted ran, like really early on. One of the players came up with this insane theory, and it like totally guessed Ted's plot, right? And he confided in me, even though I was one of the players in the game. And he's like, should I change it? I'm like, no. Why? Like, let him. And like, and so it like, and the payoff happens so much later anyway. By the time it does, it's like I had forgotten that I guessed the thing, or because it was just one of many crazy ideas. But like they had like they hit the nail on the head, and I'm like, no, that's the beauty of it. You can throw in some red herrings between now and then for sure, but I wouldn't change it.
Yeah, and again, I think context ends up mattering a lot. Yes, you might end up at the destination of being correct in your guess, but the journey of how you got there might be the thing that's completely unexpected. It shadows or colors that end point in an entirely different light than you might have seen it before. And all of that stuff is what makes you, it changes the way you remember that moment. And that's the kind of stuff that sticks with you for a long, long time as a player. Cool. Let's see. I don't think we have any more questions currently from the audience. Hey, audience.
So do you roll your dice in front of the screen or behind the screen?
I roll my dice behind the screen. Sometimes I roll whenever I don't even actually need a result, just to keep the players guessing. Sometimes I'm rolling for a real purpose. So yeah, I typically roll behind the screen.
I used to. Now I'm an in front of the screen kind of guy, and I just like to see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely two different schools of thought about dice rolling, especially whenever you're a dungeon master. And I am of the school where I think it's okay for a DM to fudge the dice occasionally. But the only times that I ever fudge the dice is when it serves the party or the narrative. I don't ever do it so that, my monster gets in one good hit or any of that kind of bullshit. It's only ever to, that guy has been hit 6 times. He really doesn't need to have a critical hit on him right now. So he hit, but it's not a critical hit because I'm not going to do that. But I use it very sparingly.
I just switched from fudging to dice fudging to narrative fudging. Right. So like most of the levers you can pull by just like fudging the dice, I feel like you can do narratively.
Yeah. I think that's there's a very good case for that as well. Yeah. Okay.
Also,
go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say I've had these fun moments in my games where I'm like, because like you said, you like to root for the players where it's like, ooh, this isn't looking good. And I'm rolling in the open, so whatever happens. And then, like, it's so much more exciting when my players like pull it out. When that happens, especially because like they know like everything's happening in front of them.
Yeah, I think that also probably is very dependent on the table dynamic, the group of people that you're playing with. I think there are a lot of players who would probably love to be able to see everything that the DM is rolling, for better or worse. And then there's other people that might not. But I think, again, that's the kind of stuff that is really, really important to go over in a session 0. To kind of establish how everybody feels about those kinds of things.
That's a good point. I mean, how you implement the rules in the game for sure is something that everyone should have the same expectations for.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very, very much the kind of DM that will, in the moment, decide I don't like the way a specific rule happens to be adjudicating something and create a different way to do it on the fly. And I'll explain to my players up front, that's just how we're going to handle it just for this specific situation, because I think that's going to be more fun than handling it this way. And again, never do that to nerf a PC's power or effectiveness in a scene. That's not the right time to use that tool. The right time to use that tool is, yes, I realize that everybody is moving at slightly different speeds per round, but we're in the middle of a chase. So we're going to make that matter a little less than it might normally. And this is what we're going to do in the chase instead. The things that are going to be become important are the obstacles you're trying to overcome and whether or not you're gaining on your quarry or it's getting away. That's the stuff that becomes important, not whether, at the end of the round, so-and-so is 15 feet ahead of so-and-so and still 20 feet behind. That gets too tedious. And it takes all of the momentum out of a scene of like a chase. So I think there's times when bending or breaking the rules all out is called for. But that's also my particular style of running the game. And there are some people that will absolutely become livid if you do that. And it's not the kind of time to use that style of play when somebody like that is sitting at your table.
Do you prefer more like cinematic style play?
I do, very much so. Yeah.
I agree. I hate gritty realism.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has its place. There's certain genres, there's certain types of stories to tell where that's needed. But on the whole, I gravitate towards, fuck it. Like this is going to be more entertaining. Let's do this instead. Because that's the way my brain tends to think anyways. I like big pulpy action. And I think running games that makes for better consumption by an audience typically, or at least that I have found. So.
Yeah, if from the audience standpoint, and also just like for me, it's a personal preference and play style, right? Like I feel like the real world has enough gritty realism for me, and and also we play a game with a lot of abstractions in it, so people get really weird about where they want their realism. Like my favorite being people that are like, oh, I don't like how natural healing is handled because it's not realistic, that you can get all your hit points back after sleeping it off, right? And I'm like, yeah, but when is it realistic to get stabbed 6 times and shot with 30 arrows? Like, none of it's realistic. So, what's the difference?
You do realize that we just fought a dragon, right?
Yeah.
Like, so
we just got charbroiled. But only magic can heal you because you literally got charbroiled. No, you really didn't get charbroiled.
Your creatures walking around with squid heads. Like, I think we can wiggle that line a little. Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we kind of hit on that already, so I won't reiterate with that question. So your other half of at Nerdarchy, Ted, is also your brother-in-law.
It's true.
How does the channel and your shared love of gaming affect family gatherings? Do you two wind up in a corner together discussing the hobby, or do you shelve it for those kinds of events?
It's kind of like a combination of both. Ted comes from a very large family that likes to congregate. I come from a very small family that we don't like to spend time together. So I find most of the family gatherings that I've been subjected to over the years traumatic mostly. So a lot of times I would just hang out with Ted and talk about nerdy stuff, and try and avoid his uncles who want to talk about NASCAR. So I'm just like, I think, yeah, it's off in a corner with Ted. Although like now it's getting kind of cool because like my nieces and nephews are beginning to play D&D and get into it. So like we're slowly infecting the rest of the family. So the corner is going to get bigger.
That's awesome. Yeah, I come from a very similar kind of family. Both sides of my family, my mother's and my father's, are both very big. And growing up, we did family reunions with my dad's family every summer for a long time. And regularly with my mom's family, we would get together for holidays and people's birthdays and things like that. Most of them stayed local. But I've always definitely been the black sheep of the family, the only one who was really into the nerdy stuff, the really nerdy stuff. Even with my brother and sister, both of them were kind of like, yeah, that stuff's kind of neat, but Jeremy takes it a little far.
So you just wanted to, talk about and play with your funny shaped dice while they're all shooting stuff.
Well, I mean, yeah, I have shot at shotgun more times in my life than I could probably count as well. Skeet shooting is also fun, but it's a different kind of fun. But instead of staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning, getting blisteringly drunk playing poker, I want to play D&D until 2 or 3 in the morning. So, yeah, it's good to have people in your immediate circle that isn't necessarily the same circle that you game with, but that you can still talk about gaming with. That's I think that's a good thing to have in your social space.
Yeah, at this point too, like I don't really do much else than gaming. Like it's my job, it's my recreation. So I don't really know how to interact with muggles as much anymore.
That's fair. That's very fair. So I guess a follow-up question is, you guys have been doing this for so long, and you have been, related to Ted for so long, or at least married into the family with Ted for so long. How do you guys still find stuff to talk about with one another?
I don't know. We just do. Like the premise behind the channel and starting it was like, these are just the conversations we're having, right? Like I remember getting in trouble at a job, right? I had a company phone and I got in trouble because like they saw that I was calling a number a lot, and like I would be like doing my job or driving and talking on the phone. I don't recommend that nowadays, but back, this is going back quite a few years, because I would just call Ted and just talk about gaming all the time anyway. So it's not really that different.
Yeah, it's just forward facing now.
Yeah, it's a little more structured, right? Like we're gonna talk about this specific thing. But yeah, we've always talked about gaming, and now we just do it in front of a camera.
That's awesome. Yeah, man. I know Ted really well. I've gotten to know him really well over the last couple of years because he plays in Jake's Dawnbreakers game with me. Yeah, and it's been awesome to get to know him. And yeah, I adore the way his mind works. It's always going, always about gaming stuff, and always about how you can balance the mechanics of what you're doing with the narrative side of it. And that's awesome to watch. And Ted's a really, really kind person. So I've definitely cherished the time that I've gotten to know him.
Yeah, he's all right.
You can say that you're his brother-in-law.
Yeah. Well, I've been hanging out with Ted for a long time now. I've been with his sister since 93, and we've been married since 98. So, Ted even set one of my houses on fire. So yeah, it's all good.
I'm gonna have to ask him about that.
Just a little bit.
I'm gonna have to ask him about that next week. Oh man. Well, Dave, that's all the questions that I have. So I think we're just about wrapping up. So is there anything else that you want to touch on or say to anybody out there who may be watching before we call it a night?
Not really. Thanks for having me on. It's been great chatting with you. I love getting nerdy. And as always, if you want to find out what I'm up to and what we're doing, it's basically, if you search Nerdarchy anywhere, we'll probably come up in that space, and you can find nerdy things that we're doing.
Absolutely. And if anybody is watching this and you haven't heard of Nerdarchy, I don't know how that happened, but you should absolutely go check them out. You should be able to find the link to their YouTube channel at the very least in the description of this video down below. Please do go check them out. Give Ted a hard time about starting a house fire. I'm just kidding. Please don't.
That's all right. Go for it.
But Dave, thank you so much, man, for agreeing to come on and do this episode with me. I love talking shop and gaming in general, and getting to sit down and pick somebody's brain who has been a staple in the hobby community for such a long time, and so out front and prolific. It's been an honor. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, well, we just doing what we do. I mean, it's fun. We like talking nerdy stuff and gaming.
And that's exactly why it works. I think if it was artificial or fake or less personal, I don't think it would work. And that's one of the reasons why I like doing help action, is because it gives me the chance to actually sit down and get to know people a little bit better, other than just sitting across from a table from them in gaming and rolling dice. So, well, I think that's about it. So we're going to go ahead and call it a night here. Until next time, may your dice roll high and your snacks always be within reach.